Kylee Van Horn with Fly Nutrition, and I work with runners and endurance athletes on their nutrition stuff. And I've known Kristen for a long time now. I feel like 6 years, maybe. Um, anyway, a lot of great questions came in, and I'm gonna try my best to answer them. I think some of them are going to be a little bit more nuanced and in depth. So I'm going to try to keep the answer as short as possible, but answer the question. So, the first one is about body composition. And this person said, I'm curious what your thoughts are on managing body composition during training. I'd like to get leaner, but also need the appropriate amount of calories to train. For me, this has always resulted in gaining weight during preparation for an event. So this question is always tricky because I always need to ask the people that are asking this question, A, why are we trying to change body composition? And then B, when is your event that you're doing? Because it's not going to be appropriate to be working on body composition within like 2 to 3 months of a target race. So trying to figure out if you are going to go for trying to change body composition, could you do it at a specific time in your training cycle? That can be difficult for people if, you're racing all the time, but maybe you need to think about like arranging your schedule in a way that allows for you that time if you want to try to change body composition. And I think, to be honest with you, this is a situation like weight, body composition changes. I usually, unless you really know what you're doing, I would recommend working with someone on this just so that you don't get yourself in a situation where you are in like a huge energy deficit, or you like get into a situation where you end up with overtraining or something. But it is going to require some kind of manipulation of macronutrients. So our protein, carbs, fats. The reality is typically, keeping your protein intake elevated and then manipulating carbohydrates and fats to change body composition is going to be the way to go. I think depending on, who the person is or, what they're trying to do, I might suggest, maybe you work some more lifting into your schedule as well. So really trying to work with, I like to shift it from maybe more optimization versus like restriction, because I do find that sometimes like this really big focus on restriction and weight loss can end up harming someone because you aren't really giving your body what it needs to adapt to the training that you're doing. So again, like if this is you and you want to change body composition, this is a big goal, maybe talking to Kristen about like how would my training schedule change a little bit here? Maybe I focus on more strength. Maybe I don't have an upcoming race in a couple of months. And maybe you do typically want to like have some variation in your training. So maybe you are having like high intensity workouts built in. So that's kind of the training side of things. And then with the dietary side of things, like I mentioned, it's going to vary for each person, but you're going to want to keep your protein intake high. You're going to manipulate carbohydrates and fats a little bit. And it does require, like, for those people that are, have a history of restriction or disordered relationship with food, it honestly requires more precision to be able to make these changes. And so if numbers are triggering for you, it's probably not going to maybe be the best focus to like try really, 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 really hard to like change that body composition. That's where I'm saying like focusing on the optimization of like, am I getting like variety of my fruit and vegetable consumption? How is my protein consumption? Am I focusing on, timing of protein, like pre and post workout? What does my carbohydrate quality look like? Am I, having simple carbs around workouts, and then outside of that workout window, having more complex carbs? So, there are some things that I work with people on that help optimize, and then that you can see shifts in body composition that way. It just might not be as quickly or as much as you're aiming for. So that's not probably the most satisfying answer to whoever answered or asked this question, but this is always like a really difficult question, I think, to answer straightforward wise, because there's just so much variation in like athletes and like where they're coming from food wise, and then what they're training for and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
I will also say that I've never actually lost weight in a training block for any race since college. And most of the time, like I'll actually gain weight, whether that's like gained weight through muscle or like body composition will change a little bit. But the way that I'm able to like reframe it in my mind is that I need to be eating more, and I need to be eating enough to account for all of the training that I'm doing, so I don't drop into red S, so I don't get iron deficiency. So like you're constantly like eating more because you're doing more. So I think that that's one thing that I definitely wanted to add to that as well.
yeah, no, that's great. I think again, depending on the person, like I work with some athletes that they really like the numbers and they really want to be precise with things. And I'm fine working with athletes on that sort of thing, but you still have to keep in mind, like, long term, have you developed habits and strategies that are going to be sustainable without like obsessive tracking and all these obsessive procedures? And that's always the goal for me, is getting people to a place where they feel like they can be confident no matter what they're working on. So it can take a while for people that are, again, trying to change body comp and like understand how to do this in a sustainable way. It can take a while to really achieve those kind of results that maybe want to be seen by the person. Um, we got another question too, that said, I know it's important for me to get more lean as I increase my mileage to take weight off my knees because they can give me some trouble. Um, I love food and it takes work. I also hate the bonking feeling. I'm trying to make sure I fuel well before and after runs and be aware of what I'm putting in my body during the meals, not adjacent to my runs. I eat vegetarian. Um, sometimes I eat mostly vegetarian. Sometimes we'll eat meat. Protein comes from nuts, cheese, tofu, eggs, etc. So again, I think this goes back to what I was saying. I'm not saying that you can't go for like weight loss body comp changes, but you've got to be strategic in when you're trying to do this, because I would not recommend doing it 2 to 3 months before a race, um, or a target race at the very least. Because of that training adaptation piece. Again, you're not going to get the most out of your training if you're not giving yourself exactly what you need. And then with this person, they're like, I hate the bonking feeling, which I'm like, okay, that's not good that you're like experiencing this bonking feeling. So, you know, how much are you reducing your nutrition? You got to be careful there. Like, do you have an understanding of what your needs are? And then this is where like the calculated, maybe we need to be careful with how much we're reducing things down, is really important. So you've got to understand like around where is my baseline to maintain, and then what am I doing currently, and make sure that you're not getting yourself into too big of a hole too. Because I would be concerned about like the bonking and like not enough carbohydrates or just not enough overall energy intake. Um, and I don't know how often that's happening, but again, not necessarily something that we want to be experiencing in our in our training cycle. So I don't necessarily, I think they were just commenting that they like to be as lean as possible. And they didn't really ask a question, but my guess is it was similar to the first question, and hopefully that gives some context around like when you should attempt it, if you're going to attempt it, understanding what your needs are, and like making sure you're not in too big of a deficit, and then focusing on, maybe you focus more on optimization versus restriction at certain points during the training cycle. And then, yeah, just being careful too, if you're gonna try to work on this kind of stuff. Um, um, the second question is ferritin and iron for those of us that are stuck in traffic on the struggle bus. That's pretty funny. So any supplement recommendations for best bioavailability, but also different product formulations? Is there more benefit to a product with iron plus vitamin C versus taking pills with a glass of orange juice? And then they ask about the dosage. Products are labeled for daily use, but some research and recommendations say best taken every other day. And then my sports doctor refers to iron supplementation as a personal crapshoot because of individual variation in uptake. I have not heard that one before, but outside of supplement and diet compliance and taking in a bioavailable product, what factors have you seen for those that have normalized their ferritin levels, aka send help, because I'm still low compared to my baseline, whoever this is. This was a great, anyways, the way this person worded this was hilarious. So, okay. I am gonna start with the frequency, I guess. I think there's so many places to start here. So when we're looking at iron supplementation, the most current research and recommendations do point to every other day supplementation. So I do want to be clear there that I recommend for my athletes, like if they are taking it every day, I'll be like, I want you to switch to every other day. Reason being is because there is a protein called hepcidin that increases as a result of iron intake, and it helps actually regulate iron in the body. And so if you're taking a high iron supplement every day, that hepcidin level can stay elevated, and then that can cause you to not absorb as much of the supplement that you're taking. So every other day is great, and then that saves you money too. Now, the caveat to that is you do need to make sure, if you do have an iron deficiency, you need to make sure that you're getting in enough iron as far as your supplementation goes. So clinical recommendations are about 65 milligrams of iron per day, of elemental iron per day. And a lot of the supplements will say on there like elemental iron. If not, you could contact the company if you're curious about it. So couple of the, like, I really like Hemaplex, which is by a company called Nature's Plus, and it does have 85 milligrams of elemental iron in it. It also has some vitamin C in there, and an herbal complex to help with absorption. The thing you have to be careful with about the forms of iron is like sometimes doctors will recommend like 300 milligrams of like the sulfate form or something. And sometimes that can cause like really bad constipation. So, being careful, I would say the sulfate does tend to be a little bit, in my experience, has tended to be a little bit more like harsher on the system. Whereas like the bisglycinate forms, or bisglycinate, and then there's one other form that tend to be a little bit gentler on the system. So I would just suggest like being cautious if you are gonna supplement with iron in the form that you're taking, and then also I might suggest easing into like if a doctor recommends you take this 300 milligram supplement, like easing into it and seeing like, do I need a whole three, and like how is my body going to react to 100 milligrams or something, if there's a way to like split the supplement or something, just because again, like I've had some people have some really bad side effects to really high doses of iron and different forms of iron. I usually though, with the iron supplementation piece and somebody that struggled for a long time, usually want you to consider like, where is this, like, why is this occurring? Why am I having such a hard time with this iron supplement or getting my ferritin levels up? Because you really, I don't know about the personal crapshoot thing from the doctor that this person said, but like, you really shouldn't have that many issues absorbing some of that iron or getting iron from your food, etc. So I usually ask like, what is someone's overall daily consumption from their food of like iron in general, and then other micronutrients involved in iron utilization and storage. And then also, what is the condition of someone's like gut health? Because that can be a big a cause of iron issues. So like I've had athletes that have an overgrowth of something called H. pylori, which is a bacteria that can actually live in the stomach and it can feed on iron. And so if you're taking in iron, it can actually feed on it, and then you're not getting in as much as you might think. If you have a GI bleed, that's something to think about too. So make sure you chat with a doc on something like that. I've had people with like dysbiosis, like a bacterial imbalance in their gut, that have issues like with causing micronutrient absorption issues and gut lining, like inability to absorb quite as much nutrition because their gut lining is irritated. So if you have gut issues, or even if you don't, like I've had people be like, oh, I don't really have any symptoms that would be concerning. I'm still usually like, well, you could consider, because I do a lot of PCR stool testing with some of my athletes that struggle with this stuff. And they'll take it and they'll be like, oh, wow, like I have this stuff going on and I didn't know that I had this stuff going on. Um, so maybe do a check on something like that too. Like consider thinking outside the box. On the overall food consumption piece, number one, you want to consider like, are you a plant-based athlete? Are you eating meat? What does that look like? Because iron absorption from plant-based sources is going to be a lot lower than our animal-based sources. So when we look at requirements of total overall volume of iron consumption from food, it is going to be higher than your traditional recommendations. So for instance, like a menstruating female athlete, their recommendation might be around 22 to 25 milligrams of iron intake if they're eating meat. But if they're plant-based, I'll raise that up maybe 28 to 30 milligrams of iron from plant-based sources. So you have to, the overall volume, if you're not getting that in, then that's going to affect your levels as well. And so that piece has to be considered. Obviously, as an athlete, we've got higher needs. We lose some iron in sweat. We've got foot strike hemolysis, meaning our red blood cells break down and we need to rebuild those. So we do have elevated needs over like the general population already. And then what I find actually is the other components, the other micronutrients that are involved in iron utilization and storage tend to sometimes be compromised. So like our magnesium, copper, vitamin A, vitamin C, all of those micros are involved in some kind of like transport process or helping in the storage process of iron, so where it's being stored as ferritin. So I'll take a look with my athletes, like how much magnesium are you consuming? And as an athlete, your magnesium needs are twice as great as somebody that is not exercising. So you need 500 to 600 milligrams of magnesium a day. And so a lot of people are not getting that in from food because our food sources only have, like, our high food sources like leafy greens, nuts, seeds, dark chocolate only have like 50 milligrams in a serving, like a cup serving or an ounce serving. So it can be difficult to get enough magnesium, and then we might start magnesium glycinate or something supplementation to kind of help with the iron utilization process. And then copper is like another random micronutrient that people might be like, oh, I've never paid attention to that. And there are a lot of random foods that contain copper, but hey, maybe you look online, you're like, oh, potatoes and dark chocolate and chickpeas or whatever. These are all high copper foods. Oh, I'm not actually consuming a lot of those. Maybe I need to increase my consumption of copper rich foods. With something like copper, I don't recommend supplementing, because copper, if you consume a supplement with copper, it can actually inhibit zinc absorption. So then you can end up with a zinc deficiency. So there's all these like intricacies here with some of these micronutrients. So you want to be careful, like just before just going to supplementation, you want to be careful. Yeah, the other thing is like if somebody's on a copper IUD, they can actually have issues with ferritin levels too, because it can actually contribute to micronutrient deficiencies, again, involved in nutrient utilization. So this is where, like, if you're somebody that, and I'm not just saying this to like be like work with a dietitian, but like if you have struggled for 2 years with this, I think it is important to maybe take a deeper look with someone, because there are so many different things that can affect iron utilization and storage, and accepting that you just have to be on a supplement for years is maybe not the best solution or answer. Because I can tell you, like, I've worked with some athletes that have been like, whoa, I never like considered that as a possibility. Or like we do the gut test and we're like, whoa, okay, all this stuff could be impacting my ferritin levels. So it's important. And especially if you're like, well, now I have to rely on iron infusions, or like I'm taking all this iron and I'm not raising my ferritin levels. Like that's not, in my mind, that's not like acceptable for like a doctor to be like, oh no, that's okay. Like it's normal, or a crapshoot or whatever this person was told. So it might be a time or a situation where you find somebody, like it could be an integrative, like functional medicine PA, or, again, lots of dietitians out there. So, look into deeper like thought processes here is kind of my recommendation for this person. And then, sorry, there were a lot of questions within this. Is there any more benefit to a product with iron and vitamin C versus taking pills with a glass of orange juice? I mean, I think like as far as absorption goes, like, why not do both? Like, I would just do as much as possible in regards to like trying to help with absorption. So I would take the iron supplement that has vitamin C with more vitamin C to try and help with absorption. And then I wouldn't say like there's any like particular benefit though, if like you're like one versus the other. I mean, I would help as much as possible and do both, but if you have to choose, then one or the other is fine. Just don't take it with calcium. So that's the main thing. Sorry. those two questions literally took me like 30 minutes, and I said I was going to be like,
All
so
good. You're crushing this. Yeah, I feel like
trying.
I've had a lot of conversations this week specifically about iron, so I feel like this is just like a very like you're covering all my bases, which is amazing. So that was a
Mhm.
great answer.
Okay. Yeah, and I could probably talk an entire hour or two on iron. So I hope I answered some of that question. And then, yeah, if they have more questions, then they can reach out to me via email or something. Um, okay, switching gears, sweat testing. Some of the home test patches Levelin recommend testing multiple times a year, but I've also read that sweat volume and frequency don't change substantially from winter to summer, assuming equal fitness at both times of year. Is repeat testing beneficial? Are there recommended times of year to do this? So I think we have to be clear, like when we're looking at the sweat testing, like what exactly are we looking for here? So with the companies like Levelin or Precision or something like that, I'm mainly focused on the sodium sweat concentration that the test results are giving us. And those results are not going to change that much. Like that's pretty genetic. So why these companies recommend repeat testing is beyond me. Probably to make more money, but let's be real here. The second part of that is the fluid losses. So there's like the sodium sweat concentration, and then there's the fluid losses. The fluid losses change. So fluid losses change based on climate, fitness level, altitude, all those sorts of things. So regular fluid loss testing, which you can do at home without ordering $100-some test, is recommended. So that you do that maybe like quarterly, and then you do the test one time and you get your sodium sweat concentration. Now, then what you have to do is you can match your sodium sweat concentration to the fluid losses. So whatever fluid you're losing, then you're losing a certain percentage of sodium, and you'll have that result from the Levelin or Precision test or whatever you're doing. So my personal opinion is that you just do it once and then you do your fluid loss testing at home. So that one was an easy answer. Um, okay, I'll answer that question in a bit, Matthew. I'll make sure I have enough time to answer that. Okay. Are there general recommendations that you can share for people who have difficulty with nutrient absorption? Frequency of lab work to monitor, general guidelines on keeping gut happy enough to maximize absorption. Are there particular nutrients to pay attention to? This person has Hashimoto's, but then they're like talking about Crohn's and celiac, and yeah. Okay. This is, yeah, so someone was like, this, if this falls into the category of this is the kind of life advice one pays you to give, then I totally understand. And maybe I do think that I can answer the question about like frequency of lab work, guidelines on keeping the gut happy, etc. So as far as frequency of lab work goes, especially if somebody, like we were just talking about iron, if you have issues with iron, vitamin D, etc., I usually recommend every 6 months. If you don't have issues with absorption, or you haven't had a history of a iron deficiency, then once a year is fine. You don't have to do multiple times. Now, the exception to that would be if you start supplementing with certain things to try and raise levels, then I would do you'd have your initial test, and then 3 months after supplementing is usually when I recommend, like, hey, get another check on this to see, oh, is the vitamin D supplementation working? Is the iron supplement working? And so that can give you a little bit of a guideline or framework to look at, I think. And then as far as like keeping the gut happy, there's a couple of like core things that I like to chat with athletes about it, about kind of keeping, your microbiome happy and the gut happy. So diversity in your diet. So I know as a lot of athletes, they get caught up in like a routine because they're so busy and they have training and work and responsibilities and all that. So having 20 to 30 different foods that grow from the ground each week is actually a good target goal for diversity, promoting diversity in the microbiome. And so that could be 3 varieties of greens. That could be like arugula and spinach and mixed greens. Like that's 3 different varieties there. It could also be black rice, purple rice, wild rice, like 3 different types of rice or something. Or it could be like, hey, I have a smoothie that has 10 things in it. Okay, well, then you already got 10 things. So, smoothies are a nice way to kind of get that variety in. But my point being is that it doesn't have to be all like these fresh veggies or something. It could be grains, it could be beans, it could be potatoes, things like that. But we know that plant diversity promotes diversity in the microbiome. Second thing is I usually suggest a serving of fermented foods every day. So that would be things like yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, unpasteurized pickles, kefir, kombucha. And so if you're like, I don't like any of those things, then maybe you consider like a probiotic or something. But I don't usually recommend like long-term probiotic supplements for people because, and especially if you start taking one after 90 days, you're going to want to switch it up because your body becomes used to whatever you're taking. So if you decide to take a probiotic for any reason, don't take it longer than 90 days. So a serving of fermented foods and per day. And then the third piece is going to be looking at increasing consumption of something called resistant starch, which is another name for prebiotics, if you've heard of those. And so typically those are going to be fibers that your little bacteria in the microbiome feed on and help them grow and proliferate. So what I usually say is the resistant starch, some of the main resistant starch foods are like potatoes, pasta, and rice that you cook and then you cool. And in the cooling process, the resistant starch forms. And then you can reheat those things and the resistant starch actually stays in the food. And so then the little bacteria that you can meal prep or whatever for a week and have like your resistant starch food every day. Beans are another source of resistant starch. Oats as well are a good source of resistant starch. Green bananas, which I'm not eating, but if you want to go and eat green bananas, go for it. So again, it's just like these little things that can help promote a healthy microbiome and promote proliferation of those things. And I find that when I do some PCR stool testing, my athletes that tend to have like really low levels of bacteria in their gut are the ones that have like serious stomach issues and they've been under fueling. So if you're not giving yourself enough fuel too, that can really affect your microbiome. And you have to remember that your microbiome is responsible for maintaining the integrity of your mucosal lining in the gut, responsible for nutrient absorption, responsible for like neurotransmitter production. So like communication with your brain. I consider them like the little foot soldiers that do the work in the gut. And so that I just think of them as like, we got to feed them so then they help us do these things. So those are a couple tips to kind of support the gut. And then, as far as like gut lining goes too, I have a lot of athletes, like if you think about it, running and sports, like there are a lot of jostling going on just from our movement. And that does cause inflammation and some damage to our gut lining. So doing, this is a situation where like glutamine is an amino acid that you can take. and doing something like a glutamine supplement to help strengthen the cells in the intestinal lining can be a really great one that's safe for you to take. I also like to promote like a high antioxidant food consumption, dark chocolate, turmeric, ginger, omega-3 consumption, which would be from like your fish products, nuts, seeds. You can take an omega-3 supplement if you wanted to. And then I'm trying to think here what I'm missing. Oh, green tea is another one. So green tea, daily green tea consumption is really, really good for your microbiome as well. So decaf or regular. It contains a powerful antioxidant called EGCG, which can be really health promoting. So that's something I'll have my athletes do sometimes for gut health. And then a lot of these questions are like multiple questions in one, so I'm trying to get through. And then particular nutrients to pay extra attention to. Well, I think that's going to vary depending on the condition, to be honest with you. Like if I'm working with somebody with Hashimoto's or something, I might focus on thyroid specific nutrients that are supportive of thyroid health. Or if somebody has Crohn's or celiac, like I might focus more on like your B vitamins, and you might have trouble with your iron absorption sometimes. So it really dependent, I think, on the condition. So I think that one's a little more difficult to answer in like in a call question. Okay, a couple of these other ones are pretty short, so I think I can get through them. Protein intake for female athletes, what do you recommend in grams per kilogram? So I think we have to remember, like, I just want to point out with this female athlete, like, shout out, that there's not a ton of research in the space on female athletes. Like, I want there to be more, but there's not a lot of things that are like, this is the way it is for female athletes. And so, my recommendations for female athletes are pretty similar to male athletes for protein, which are going to be 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram body weight for endurance athletes. Now, if there's a different type of athlete, then that's going to vary. But we do know, I will say we do know I get a lot of questions about like peri and postmenopausal women. We do know that range is really great for peri and postmenopausal female athletes. So I usually apply it across the line to all female athletes. And when we are aging too, we have higher muscle protein breakdown rates. So we need to keep protein needs elevated. So if those numbers are shocking to you, then maybe, you need to reevaluate what you're doing. I would say so for the 2.2 grams per kilogram body weight, that's like 1 gram per pound, if you've heard that recommendation. So that's pretty high. I'm not saying you need that all the time. That's like if you're doing 3 to 4 hours of training a day or something. So, if you're doing 1 gram per pound because you heard that, that's probably too much most of the time, unless you're doing really high volume training. So, just think on it and think about if you need to figure out what your needs are to get your weight in kilograms. Take your weight, divide by 2.2, and that'll give you your weight in kilograms. Weight in pounds, divide by 2.2, sorry. Somebody asked about fueling and hydration when breastfeeding. So I'm just going to give and this might be Maggie, who knows? But I'm just going to give short recommendations that are more generalized. So with breastfeeding, it's very energy intensive. And I find that a lot of my female athletes that are breastfeeding are really underdoing their intake. You have to think about, you need an extra 600 calories a day just from breastfeeding. and then you're training. So you have all of that energy that you're expending. And then you have your baseline, nutrition requirements. So we're talking for a lot of women, like 3,000 calories a day. Like that's 3 to 4,000 calories a day. So you have to be, and if you aren't consuming that, I've had women get stress fractures. I've had women get like just serious like energy, like feeling so low energy. Like, yes, having the kid and breastfeeding is already energy intensive, but then this on top of that, it's just like extreme fatigue. So you've got to be strategic. And like a lot of my breastfeeding female athletes will just have like frequent snacks all the time and just always be eating in addition to their meals. So you can't do the thing where you're like, I'm so busy that I only eat 2 meals a day and then I forget to eat and like just aren't taking care of yourself. Even though, you're trying to take care of your new addition, you have to look out for yourself too. And then with the fluid consumption too, it's literally the recommendation is a gallon of water, 128 ounces as your baseline. And then if you're losing like fluids from sweat, you've got to add that on top of that. So it's like a full-time job just fueling yourself for this too. Because that can really affect your milk production too, is the fluid piece overall. And then I would even say, just from this person didn't ask about this, but from a micronutrient perspective, I do suggest like a multivitamin or some kind of boost for yourself during this time, because it can be really easy to get yourself in a micronutrient deficiency too. So I think this is a time that's warranted, like, yeah, let's maybe take a multivitamin, some kind of supplement to cover my bases. But yeah, to answer this question, it's a lot. You're fueling another human though, so that's the thing. Okay, and then how to eat. My nutrition question is pretty general. How to eat enough of the right foods throughout the day while training a lot. I feel like I am both overeating and undereating somehow. I get too full from meals, but I'm often ravenous. I'm looking for guidance on when to time protein and carbs throughout the day relative to my workouts, and any insight as to why I'm either full or starving would be great. Yeah, so I think it's actually important to keep in mind that hunger and fullness hormones are altered when you are exercising a lot. So I would say this is actually a normal thing that people experience that are doing high intensity sessions, long training sessions, etc. Not that I mean, sometimes it can be helpful to know that you're not like some freak of nature, that you're like, oh, this is so weird. Like, why am I experiencing this? And then I think as a result of that, like if you're trying to force in big meals, then you can feel like, oh, I'm pretty full, like halfway through this meal. And then you stopped eating. And then 45 minutes later, you're like, oh, I'm hungry again and I got a snack. So it's like you kind of get in this cycle. So this is where like having some intentionality with your fueling can be important. And what I mean by that is giving yourself some structure. So everyone's structure is going to be different. But for a lot of my athletes, I'll talk to them about like divide your day into thirds of the day. And then if you give yourself that division, then you can try to kind of get certain things in thirds of the day, but it doesn't require you to have this exact thing in each meal. Like you could have 2 snacks and a smaller breakfast, or, it gives you that flexibility versus just like, I got to have 3 meals and they have to look exactly like this to hit my nutrient needs. If you want to do that, you can, but I find that some flexibility here is helpful. And then looking at, so the thirds of the day piece and then the planning process, I think is really important too. So a lot of my athletes are like, yeah, I'm just kind of winging it, or I eat the same things every week and it's just, haphazard. So some planning I think is really important. So in the sense of, um, I suggest planning your snacks out. Actually, a lot of my athletes don't plan their snacks out. So think about planning like 3 to 5 snacks out for your week. And think about if you have a heavy volume week, maybe you struggle with protein or you struggle with carbs. Okay, 3 of those snacks I'm going to make have 45 to 60 grams of carbs or something, or at least 15 to 20 grams of protein. And so you think about those things ahead of time and help you fill in the gaps in meals that you might be kind of, missing out on a little bit. And then in the same respect, like if you've got your meals planned out, you need to execute as well. Like I'll have athletes plan, but then they'll be like, I got so busy at work that I didn't have my meal because I wasn't hungry because I'm training a lot. So, and I know Kristen and I have talked about this, like setting alarms up, like on your phone or on your computer or something. Like you've got to figure out a way, like skipping meals when you're training this much is not appropriate. Like it's not going to get you what you need to support yourself with this kind of training volume. Now, if you're not doing that much training volume, then maybe it's a different story, but most of you here are probably training for something pretty intensive. So you need to be strategic with what you're doing. And then the difficult part of this question is like how to know like what to include in your meals and like what enough is. And that's always the question that I get is like, how do I know what enough for me is? Because I always hear eat enough, but that's like not specific to me. And that unfortunately is not a straightforward answer that I can answer in this time period. So everyone's needs are going to be different. And there are certain like ranges for proteins, carbs, and fats that you can consider. But everyone also has different lifestyle, different eating habits, different health challenges sometimes. And so you kind of have to like look at that overall before you can totally like, there's no one general thing that I can say that's going to be like, this is enough for you. I will give you an example though, of how you might approach something like this. So say what I usually do is I teach athletes how to adjust their nutrition for different days of training. So like I teach them how to classify a training day for a day of eating. And then from there, we look at, okay, your protein needs, this is just an example, your protein needs on a day where you're doing less than an hour of activity might be 100 grams. But if you're doing a day where you're doing 2 hours of activity, it's 120 grams for protein. So then what we might do is divide that out. Like that's great to know those numbers, but I still don't think that's sustainable because you still have to sit there and add up numbers throughout the day. So what you would do is then take that 100 and you divide it into thirds of the day. So you're going to do 23 to 33 grams per third essentially of the day for your protein to try and get that in on a light day of training. So then what you want to do is try and figure out what does that look like based on the foods that I eat? What does 23 to 33 grams of protein look like from a food perspective, from a plant-based perspective, or if you eat meat, etc. And so that can be really helpful to break it down. And that's why I break it down into thirds, because you can break it down into a smaller number, which then you can apply visuals to once you kind of like learn what foods contain protein that you eat, what does that look like? And then once you figure that out, then you got to look at, okay, well, maybe I'm actually hitting the 100 grams on the easy day. So I don't really need to focus on that. I just got to get to the 120. That's my main weak area. So if you got to get to the 120, there's different strategies you can employ. You could do higher protein snacks, or maybe you just do a protein shake that day, or maybe at dinner, you're going to do more protein at dinner. So there's like, there's flexibility here. You just have to figure out what strategies you're going to use to make it easiest on yourself so you don't have to overthink the process. That's a hard question to answer because again, this this could be a whole like 2-hour class answering that sort of about it, plan, organize, break down my day, and then, try and figure out what that looks like. Okay. There are definitely some here in the Zoom chat.
Yeah. Is it beneficial? Do you want me to like read those out for you?
Might be a little off.
Oh, there
Kristen,
we go.
can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, it was a little glitchy for a second. Um,
Hopefully the internet holds. Stupid mountain internet, I swear.
yeah.
Uh,
Um,
but I can answer Matthew's questions. So is there a calculation we can use to determine pre-work fueling in terms of calories, carbs to take in based on length and intensity of workout? Yeah, so I actually do for carbohydrates in particular, I like to create a scalable intake for or an intake goal for pre-exercise for my athletes. So usually I'll say 60 minutes or less of easy activity would be about 0.5 to 1 grams per kilogram body weight for carbohydrates. If you do a hard workout or anything between an hour and 2 hours of activity, then I would do 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram body weight for carbs. And then if you do a long run or anything 2 hours and above, then I usually say 1.5 to 2 grams per kilogram body weight. So creating a range for yourself. So it might be like 30 to 60 grams of carbs for like anything under an hour. And then when you go up to an hour to 2 hours, maybe it's 60 to 90, and then, 90 to 120 or something. And then calorie wise, that's a little bit variable, but usually like less than an hour, 300-ish calories is fine. If you're doing more than that, then I usually say like 300 to 500 for an hour to 2 hours, and then 500 to 700 before a long run. Some of my athletes are like, what? Like, I only take in 200 calories before my long run. So if that's you, you need to like maybe work on trying to get more calories in. So hopefully that'll help you, Matthew, with like figuring out your own scalable pre-workout. And then a calculation to figure out how much electrolytes for race efforts. So yeah, this is where the sodium sweat test would be really beneficial. So if you get your sodium sweat test back and you figure out I'm losing 50 milligrams of sodium per ounce of sweat that I'm sweating out, then you can use that to help you figure out, okay, how much am I losing fluid-wise every hour, which is this much sodium that I'm losing every hour. And then you're going to figure out a percentage of that for consumption every hour. So usually you'll consume about 75 to 90% of your losses every hour. That's going to be your target intake every hour. And sodium's the biggest one you're going to want to focus on because it is lost in the highest amounts in sweat. Whereas some of the other ones, magnesium, calcium, those sorts of things, they are lost, but not in nearly as high of amounts. And a lot of our, like, so if you are doing an ultra or something, a lot of times we are going to take in maybe some food items that'll have some of those micros in them. So we don't specifically need to focus on that. The exception might be if you're only doing like liquid nutrition or something for a 100-miler, but I wouldn't even recommend that. So if that's you, maybe you should reevaluate. Okay, so hopefully that helps with the electrolyte question. And then if I'm eating a healthy protein-filled breakfast before a race, I'm sometimes not hungry during that first race hour. Do I still need to be forcing food down to hit my per hour carb calorie goals and avoid a fuel hole? or is it, or is starting to consume during hour 2 okay? I would say for this one, I have more, like if you're an athlete that experiences nausea, bonking, cramping issues, like I always say start fueling earlier. I understand that you might feel pretty full, but the point of fueling earlier also is to extend your glycogen stores. So, I'm not going to say you can't do this, but I would say for most of my athletes, I'm recommending like, let's start fueling early and often because typically it's going to prevent GI problems from occurring later on. And again, why not try to extend those glycogen stores? Okay. I think that's it on the questions that I see in here. But if anyone else has a question that I can answer in 2 minutes.
Kylie, you are such a rock star.
I was like kind of rushing there to like, oh, can I get through this? Like,
Yeah.
whew, you know, like again, it's always hard on these Q&As because I'm not always satisfied with my answers to some of these questions because they are more complex. So if you weren't satisfied with my answer, I apologize, but I tried my best to like give the details, especially for the body comp one and that last one about like structuring everything throughout the day and eating enough. That's always like really hard to cover, all the stuff that needs to be taken into consideration there.
Yeah, I think you did a great job. And I think like generally a lot of questions were answered and even like follow-up questions that came from the answers you did give were also answered, which is incredible.
Okay.
Definitely want to let people know like how can they work with you? Where can they find you? I'll send this all out in our newsletter as well, but I know you do master classes, you do a flight collective, you do one-on-one. So I definitely want to like get that information to these guys too.
Yeah, and all my stuff's on flynutrition.org.
Cool.
So if you guys want to check that out, you can. I think for people that have like a lot of just questions that and they're pretty self-motivated and want to keep learning, like the Flight Collective is great because it's the monthly membership thing I have because people can be in there, ask anything that you want to ask, and I go in and answer those questions, as well as like there's a group setting too. So people might share like, oh, I do this thing as a gluten-free athlete, which can be helpful to get other ideas. And then I do monthly master classes in there that are recorded. So like next month, I'm doing one on developing your race fueling plan. And so again, if you're self-motivated and want to do something like that, that's probably the place to be. If you have more specific like health questions and like, how do I apply this to myself? Then that's going to be more like the one-on-one coaching or like a race fueling session or something.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
and then
Um,
Instagram, we all have a hate love relationship to Instagram, but I do try my best on there to educate people.
yeah, I direct people to your Instagram so often. I feel like it's just like the such a solid source of information in a way that's not like too flowery or overcomplicated. Like it's very matter of fact, very straight to the point and just like really, really good stuff. So if you're not following Kylie on Instagram yet, you should. You should be.
Yeah. Yeah, and then if you have a general question or something, like contact me, Kylie at flynutrition.org. Happy to help, you know, a singular question or something. If it's more detailed, I'll send you to a certain area to ask me that.
Perfect. Well, Kylie, thank you so much. I
Yeah.
cannot
Thanks
tell
for
you how much.
having me.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I'll obviously like we're friends. We've been friends for a long time, but this is just like so cool to be able to work together in this capacity. So I'm really
Yeah.
grateful for your time.
Yeah, for sure. Great chatting with you guys and have a good rest of your day.
Cool. All right. Have a good weekend.
Bye.